Welcome to the Friday Transportation Seminar at Portland State University. My name is Chris Monsieur. I'm a faculty member here in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. So today I'm very pleased to introduce Doug Bish from the Oregon Department of Transportation, and he's going to talk about an update to the way they're doing their safety program called Jurisdictionally Blind Safety. So, and just as an interesting bit of information, you have Doug to thank for me to being here in Oregon. He was on my interview panel when I came to the Oregon DOT and supervised me when I was there. So we go back a long way. So Doug, turn it over to you, and
okay.
Mic's on.
Mic's on. Thank you, Chris. And I guess I need this clicker too. I see some familiar faces out there. My name is Doug Bish again, and I'm with the Oregon Department of Transportation. I've been there about 28 years, 29 years now, and I've been around the department in several sections. I kind of ended up in traffic because when I hit traffic about 16 or 18 years ago, I really thought it was really interesting with the people factor and the human behavior, and I especially like safety. So this is my topic of passion. And what we're doing at ODOT is we're introducing jurisdictionally blind safety. And I'll get into what that means a little bit for you, but I'll give you a little bit of background too, as soon as I figure out this clicker. There we go. Okay. And I apologize for the acronyms, and I'll try to explain them all. And I probably will use them frequently, and just raise your hand and remind me what does that one mean. MAP 21 is the acronym for the federal legislation. I believe it's moving ahead for progress in the 21st century or something like that. They always come up with good acronyms at the federal level. And under the federal legislation, they've had this program for a while that we call HSIP, the Highway Safety Improvement Program. That's what that stands for. The Highway Safety Improvement Program is one of the major categories of funding in the federal legislation. And it emphasizes trying to reduce fatal and serious injury crashes on the roadways. So this federal program is all about safety, and sometimes we think about safety in terms of all kinds of crashes and how safe you feel. So there's a lot of different varying definitions when I say, what do you think safety is? In this regard, in HSIP, it's reducing fatal and serious injuries. So you've got to kind of keep that in context. What we're really after is reducing those crashes that impact people's lives or families because taking away a loved one. So it emphasizes the fatal and serious injury reduction. It emphasizes spending on all public roads, and we'll get into that more. That's really about the jurisdictionally blind. For many years, ODOT has been spending its HSIP funds primarily on state highways, where we got an increase in Highway Safety Improvement Program funds. We're one of the few categories that actually got an increase. Some of the other categories actually went down a little bit. It requires performance-based measures like measuring the fatal and serious injury crashes per VMT, the rate of fatal and injury crashes. It requires new roadway data and highway base map requirements, collection around what they call a minimum inventory roadway data elements. That's MIRE is the acronym that they use. You may have heard that. And it maintains an emphasis on data-driven approach, and I'll get into more about what that means too. So HSIP has the objective to reduce fatal and serious injuries. So we really try to stay with the treatments that are going to do that are going to impact the fatal and serious injuries. One area where we identify those strategies that we're going to use is called the State Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And this is an overall plan, and this plan has things like education, enforcement, and emergency medical, in addition to engineering. So it's the comprehensive safety. What I mostly deal with is the engineering side of the house. So when we're talking about where do we put engineering strategies to try to reduce fatal and serious injuries, we're talking about trying to use the data to inform us about where to put those, where they might have the most impact. And that's the data-driven approach. Sometimes we have crash data. Well, we always have crash data. But sometimes the crash data doesn't always inform us like it should. An instance of that is pedestrian and bicycles. The crash data is so sparse for that, you can't really use the crash data as a really good indicator. So you look at other things too. You might look at the speed of the roadway, the width of the roadway, the number of lanes, other what we call surrogates or risk factors. But the key to any good safety project from an engineering standpoint is trying to identify where those projects should go. So we've been experimenting with the systematic measures. The traditional way of doing things is to let the crash data inform us. Where's the hot spots? Where are the crashes occurring most? What intersections, for instance, have the highest crash rates? That would be more of a traditional approach to going out and maybe you've heard the 10 top intersections in a city or that type of thing. That's a traditional approach. The systematic looks at it more from the standpoint, okay, let's start with a measure that we know is proven. Start with rumble strips, for instance. It's one of my favorites. Rumble strips are fairly inexpensive per mile, and they can reduce the fatal and serious injury crashes quite a bit. And so you start with something that you knew is proven, and then you look for places to put that. Now, the crash data can inform you. Sometimes, if you've got a systematic measure like updating curve warning signs, sometimes you might look for sharp curves. So you'd look for risk factors instead. So this systematic approach is what we're using to complement the traditional approach. And we also do a comprehensive approach where we invest in education, enforcement, emergency medical programs that improve the safety. Emergency medical is kind of after the crash, and we're trying to save their lives. But that can be a good strategy too if you're going to reduce fatals. So safety in Oregon. The safety in Oregon picture, this pie chart, the blue is the state highways, and it represents about 8,000 miles. The green and the red are the rural and urban off-state highways, and represents about 66,000 miles. I'll just let that sink in for a little bit. They're about half and half. 48% of the fatal and serious injury crashes occur on state highways. 52% occur off state highways. You can imagine it's easier to treat the 8,000 miles with half the fatal and serious injury crashes than it is to treat the urban and rural off-state that are 66,000 miles. So it's more spread out on the local system. So this is an important fact to keep in mind, because if you're trying to do the traditional approach where you're trying to identify hotspots based on the number of crashes or crash rates, you can do that somewhat on the local system, but you're not going to be very productive at bringing down the total numbers. That's why we want to try to complement it with the systematic. So ODOT, having discussed this before with our local partners, the cities and the counties, met with two groups, one called the League of Oregon Cities and one called the Association of Oregon Counties, met with their representatives and discussed how can we improve safety in Oregon and how can we implement a more comprehensive approach and do this jurisdictionally blind. We want to get after all those fatal and serious injuries. And we don't really care what road it's on. We just want to drive down the fatal and serious injuries. So we discussed the need, and that chart kind of informed us what the need is. Well, half of it occurs on the local system. We discussed moving towards a jurisdictionally blind safety program and what that looks like. And we wrote up a memorandum of understanding, an MOU between us, AOC, and LOC. And that memorandum had principles in it that we all agreed to. And I'll kind of go through those principles, and that kind of forms the basis for what we're doing jurisdictionally blind. And it was mentioned before this, before I got on here, that some other states were also doing it. I was talking to somebody. Some other states are kind of doing the same kind of thing, and they have different ways of doing it. Each state is kind of developing different ways. So, you know, in a few years, we're going to have the best practices, and we're probably going to converge on kind of what that practice is and what makes most sense for each state. But the program principle, and you'll see this repeated throughout, is this goal to reduce fatal and serious injury crashes. And I want to kind of burn that into your memory, because sometimes people think safety is about feeling safe, or the road that I drive on, I want this improved, and that's a safety project. And that's really not what we're talking about here. We're talking about trying to address those fatal and serious injury crashes. So we want it to address safety on all public roads, as I mentioned. We want it to be data-driven. We want the data to inform us about how to go after reducing fatal and serious injuries. We want it to be blind to jurisdiction, which is kind of the same as addressing safety on all public roads, but it's really this concept that the public doesn't know whose road they're driving on. They may know that the interstate is ODOT, but they don't know in downtown Portland which road is ODOT's, which is the counties, which is the cities. And there's a mixture. Oftentimes you do get into a mixture of county, city, and ODOT roads in an urban area. We're going to do a little bit different than some of the other states. We've said that ODOT's going to oversee these projects, and they're going to try to bundle them in such a way that ODOT is working with Washington County, with Beaverton, with Portland Metro, and bundle a systematic measure together so that when they go out with a project, it might be a project that's partially on a state highway, partially on a county road, and partially on a city street. So they're going to try this new bundling. Whereas before, we've kind of always, okay, here's your money, City of Portland, here's your money, Washington County. We'd like you to follow these principles, go do good. So this is a little bit different of an approach. We're going to see how far this takes us. And this last bullet is we've got something called the STIP. It's a statewide transportation improvement program. It's where we list all of our projects that we're going to do for the next 4 years. And we've made these promises that we're going to do these projects. So we can't really say, oh, now we're going to do some safety projects, so we're going to take something out of the STIP to put some safety projects in. So one of the bullets was we want to remain true to the commitments we've made in our STIP and those projects that we've promised to do. Because those are important. We've promised them to the public and to the local jurisdictions that we work with. So funding principles, we're going to allocate funds to the ODOT regions. I maybe should explain, in Oregon, there's 5 ODOT regions. In the Willamette Valley, there's 3. There's the Portland metro area that makes up one region. There's the central, which is Salem, and from Portland down to Eugene. And then there's from Roseburg down to Medford, that's the 3rd one. And then east of the Cascades, there's 2 more. This kind of split in half east of the Cascades. So there's 5 ODOT regions. And we're going to give to each ODOT region based on the number of fatal and serious injuries that are occurring in their region on state highways and local roads. So we're going to allocate the money based on how many fatal and serious injuries they have, which is a little different than we've been doing in the past. We're going to strive to be proportional between urban and rural. In the past, the more conventional, traditional method has kind of, the balance has been tipped towards urban. That's because it's easier to locate an intersection and people agree that that intersection needs safety than it is to go out and do rumble strips along a corridor. So, you know, if you look at the proportion of fatal NAs that are occurring, it's about half urban and half rural. But we've traditionally spent more on urban because it was easier to identify those hotspots, I think, and because it had more political pressure. We'll just say that the political will was to, when they saw crashes occurring at a spot, let's fix them rather than spread out through a corridor. So the funds, again, will support the fatal and serious injuries, and a portion of the funds are going to behavioral strategies. We've set aside some of the funds to fund things like education and enforcement, which are important because about 90% of the safety problems we have out there are behavioral. And I often get the question, well, why do you do so much engineering if most of it's behavioral? Well, the engineering affects the behavioral. If we can keep the person that's drunk on the road by improving delineation, then they're not going to crash and they're going to come home to their loved ones. Yeah, and that's controversial what I just said, but you get the idea. We want to save lives. We don't want to make no moral judgments at this point. So the project selection principles, we're going to focus on strategies to reduce fatal and serious injuries. So what might be a strategy to one person might not impact fatal and serious injuries. So we're going to try to focus on proven measures that do reduce fatal and serious injuries. We're going to have ODOT overseeing where the projects are. We're going to give some, I think we're going to work into a place where we're going to be working with some local agencies, but they might have to, if like the city of Portland wants to do a project, they might have to work with Beaverton and Washington County to bundle that project. That's kind of what we've told them. Rather than this, here Portland, here's your money to go do what you want, we're going to say, here Portland, here's some money to go do this thing, and oh, by the way, you need to work with Beaverton and Hillsborough and Forest Grove and Washington County and Multnomah County to get their needs all bundled in that project. So that might tweak some people. We're trying to push the boundaries, push out of the box. And I think I've covered that combined projects on state and local roads. We also want to follow the principles of practical design. That means, what that really means is if you don't, our standards are set up so that you have pretty wide shoulders, pretty wide lanes, that type of thing. That's our standard design when we build a new road. But if you have a county road that has narrow shoulders and narrow lanes, if the only thing you're going to do is put center rumble strips down through there, you don't have to go through and widen the lanes and widen the shoulders and that type of thing. So that's practical. We're being practical about how we're designing things. We're not designing things to full standards. Kind of gone away from doing that over the last couple of years. We're kind of looking more at what we're trying to do with the project rather than trying to build the road out and trying to accommodate everything. There may be a reason why we have to build wide shoulders. I could think of a good one, to accommodate bikes on suburban roads, roads that are on the fringe of the urban areas. So we have these commitments in our statewide transportation improvement program. We have these list of projects that we're doing. And one of the reasons why we do that is so that we can get out ahead of it and do all the planning that's necessary. With federal funds, and I don't know too much about this, so don't take this as gospel, but you have all these environmental regulations that you got to follow. How many people have heard of NEPA? It's the National Environmental Protection Act. We've got to make sure we're not dirtying the waters or fouling the air or adding other things to our system that we don't need. So you've got to do all these federal requirements. And it's not only the environmental side, there are other federal requirements that we've got to follow. And so to get out in front of these projects, we have to have them planned for about 4 years. So we have enough time to do all those federal requirements. We can gain all the agreements with all of our partners, like DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, and those kinds of partners. So that's why we have to get out ahead of it. So all this to say that when we're planning new projects, we really can't add to our projects unless they're out there a ways. We can't add new projects to them, to our STIP, unless they're out there a ways. So what we realized was we can't actually do this full jurisdictionally blind program until 2017. But that's too far away, so we wanted to do a transition. We wanted to at least get some money flowing to the locals. In our current STIP, we already have quite a bit of safety money on state highways. We wanted to get some flowing to the local jurisdictions. So we developed this transition program. This transition program is about $16 million over 4 years, which sounds like a lot to you and me. We could use that in our household budget. But it isn't much when it comes to fixing roads in Oregon, when you're talking local system being 66,000 miles. So we have 4 years we want to bridge the gap or do this transition. So we're going to spend $60 million over 4 years. And we've decided with the cities and counties that in this transition, we're just going to pick a few systematic measures. Maybe in one area of the state, we're going to pick rumble strips to do in the rural, and intersection reflective backplates on all the traffic signals in the urban, or some other measure. We have a list of measures that we're looking at. The measures include such things, and I'll show you an example of it. It includes things that address roadway departure, which is a big problem in our state. About 60% of our fatal and serious injury crashes are roadway departure, where somebody actually just runs off the road. A lot of those are single vehicle roadway departures. Intersections is the other big one. It's about 30%. And then you've got ped and bike. Those are a big 3. Those are our 3 emphasis areas. So we've got systematic measures, proven systematic measures that will address each of those areas, that the state will, that the area will, the region, and the local stakeholders and ODOT will decide which one best applies in our area, in the Portland Metro, in the Salem to Eugene area, in the Roseburg to Medford area, and east of the mountains. You can imagine that there's different things that they'll want to do because there's different emphasis in those areas. So we're going to have all the parties come together in each region and try to engage and develop a selection process. This is really unlike any other state has done, because most of the other states that I've looked at that are doing some kind of jurisdictionally blind, they're basically following the traditional method of, here we want you to go out and do this, and we'll give you this money. Or they're selecting their top 10 counties and then saying, we want to spend money in the top 10 counties to address this measure. Those are the kinds of things that are going on nationwide. So this is a little different I imagine some states might be doing this that I didn't find. So I've already kind of explained this. In 2013 to 15, we have $10 million total. In 16, we have $6 million. And 17 and beyond, we want to implement this jurisdictionally blind. And we don't know what that's going to look like right now. We're hoping that going through this process with the locals and trying to figure out a few systematic measures will kind of inform us to how we proceed in 2017. But to proceed in 2017 on time, we have to get that done in 2014, 2015. Because we have to, remember, we have to decide in front of it what we're going to do and how we're going to do it so we can meet all of our obligations to our other partners, federal regulations and such. So here's the splits. Region 1 is that Portland metro area. It's got most of the funds on the local roads because it's got most of the fatal and serious injuries occurring on local roads. Region 2 is that Salem to Eugene area, and it's the next biggest one. Region 3 is the Roseburg to Medford area. Region 4 is the center half of the east, which is Bend, Klamath Falls, and up above is the Dalles. And then Region 5 is the smallest one, and it's more easterly. It's like Pendleton, LeGrand, Ontario, and I don't know if Burns is in there. I think Burns is in there. Yeah, that space where it's good to go hunting in the summer, and I don't know much about that. So, but you could see we've got $10 million and $6 million scheduled over these years for a total of $16 million that we're going to try to dole out and try to figure out the best measures. So we're going to hire a consultant to help us do this because facilitating that discussion is important, and we'll probably have a consultant who works regularly with the locals. A lot of times a local agency will have a consultant being their traffic engineer and their safety engineer. So the local jurisdictions are very used, the smaller ones are very used to having the consultants working with them. And the consultants really do know their needs because they do work with them. So we'll ask the local jurisdictions to work with us to select a few systematic key measures. We'll have kickoff meetings probably in May, probably last half of May for about 2 weeks. We'll go around to all these regions, all these ODOT regions, and do these kickoff meetings. Try to get everybody in agreement on a few systematic measures to try in their region. And again, the ODOT regions will be in charge of delivering the projects. So here's a chart, and this chart was taken, the idea for this chart was taken from Missouri, who also has a jurisdictionally blind safety program. But basically, they broke out their program so they could show what kinds of crashes were occurring on state highways, what kinds occurring on city, what kinds were occurring on county. This one happens to be the county one. So it says the county roads have 2,000 crashes. In Region 2, that's the Salem to Eugene. So it has 2,000 fatal and serious injury crashes on it, of which 400 are urban, 600 are rural, or 1,600 are rural. So you can see the county roads are mostly rural, but what you don't know is that some county roads actually go into urban areas, so that's why you get some urban. And in fact, some of the big arterials that go through some urban areas are county roads. I mean, the county is the jurisdiction over that road, even though it's in the city limits. So you could see here, if you look down through this, and I've noticed a trend, at intersection, it's always turning and angle crashes. I mean, that's the big one, turning and angle crashes, turning and angle crashes. It might be angle and turning crashes. That one's kind of a blip, but there's only 9 there. So here's turning and angle. And then non-intersection it's these run off the road kind of things, like hitting fixed objects. Non-collision is just, I went off the road and turned over and didn't hit anything, but maybe turned it over. Or head-on is also run off the road, out of your lane, head-on into the other lane, which I've seen on the news recently. Quite a few head-ons, and center line rumble strips might prevent a few of those. So we've got this category down here, run off the road. ROR stands for run off the road. Look at that, 1,100 of the 2,000 are run off the road in this area. So you can imagine this would be used to inform you about what's the conditions, what's the types of crashes that are occurring. There's other data that we could use to do that too. So I promised you also an example of some of the systematic countermeasures, like curve warning signs, oversized curve warning signs, chevrons, rumble strips, that's a big one for roadway departure. And we've got more than this list, but this is just an example. And so we've got, these are just roadway departure, but we've got ones for intersections, and we've got ones for ped and bike crashes too. So the timing of these projects still needs to be worked out. We need to meet with the regions, do our kickoff, select what systematic measures we're going to do. But we're imagining that once we do that process, the scoping for the project, the actual project development, will occur this year, late in the year, and that we'll actually start delivering some in 2014. Hey, I'm at the end of my slideshow. So, is there anybody that has any questions about that?
Looks like. Okay.
Hi. I noticed on the slide that had the breakdown of crashes that it had bike and ped listed, but no details there. I was just wondering if bike and ped.
Oh, this right here?
Yeah.
It's there. I think the slide got kind of messed up. It's 50.
Okay.
50 here and 64 there.
So those are being treated as equal and equally addressed in the projects that will be considered?
Yes. If this number is a large concern, then it will be treated and addressed if the stakeholders decide that that should be the way they go. The reason we broke this out here is because ped and bike, ped shows up in here. Right there, 24. So this is a pedestrian accident where a motor vehicle hit a pedestrian. And it shows up under non-intersection. And those occur quite a bit too. Right here, there's Summit signals. But we wanted to get bike in there too. And so we broke these out separately so that when you add these two up here, they add up to that number. But of that number, 50 of them were bike or ped.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you aren't this far along in the process yet, but does ODOT have in mind selection criteria they plan on using for selecting the projects out of each region? And follow up to that, do they plan on being uniform across the regions, or will each region develop its own?
So by criteria, you mean criteria under which we select where we'll do projects?
Yeah, which projects will actually, I'm assuming the cities, I know ODOT will come up with more projects than they can fund for the process of actually choosing the ones that will move forward for implementation.
Okay. Good question. We've actually done some plans which show some potential areas for roadway departure and for intersections. And we're working on a third plan for ped bike as we speak. Now those, depending on what each region decides is their systematic measure, I think is going to be, they're going to have to use different criteria. So it's going to depend. They'll use crash data to inform them first, and then they'll also look for other factors. If it's ped and bike, the ped bike plan that we're kind of planning now, we're going to be looking at a whole host of different criteria in addition to crash data, because the ped and bike crash problem is so sporadic and spread out. You can't just look at 5 years of data and say that's your hot spot. You have to kind of look at, okay, where are the crashes occurring, what type of roadway. Portland Metro did a study where they identified attributes of bike and ped walking corridors that basically might be where we want to focus for ped and bike improvements, if that's what the region decides to do.
Doug, I had a couple questions about the bundling idea.
Sure.
It sounds like, it sounds like a couple ways you could bundle. It could be a measure that's applied to multiple jurisdictions, or could it also be a roadway that crosses jurisdictional boundaries that have a similar chronic problem? And then also the second question is on the education side of things. Could that be a bundled remedy as well, where Beaverton and Portland and Gresham are all doing drunk driving campaigns under one project? Or
Yeah, I think so. I think they could bundle the education too. And I think they should bundle the education. The good thing about trying to bundle this is we're going to be working together instead of at odds for who gets what money. We're going to be working together for a common cause. What was your first question again?
Whether the bundle would be measure-specific, applied to multiple jurisdictions, or facilities-specific, say a road, Cornell Road. Cornell Road in Portland and Cornell Road in Washington County. Would that be the bundle, or would it be rumble strips on Cornell Road?
Yes, not
Yes.
sure yet, but it could be either way. Yeah, I'm thinking we're going to let the regions try to decide what makes sense for the regions and what makes sense to bundle. Some regions may just split their region in half and say, this half is rural and we're going to kind of bundle it this way, and this half is urban, we're going to kind of bundle it and do 3 of these cities that are close together and these 3 cities that are close together. It's gonna be more practical for what works in each region.
Do you find in ODOT's, since you're talking about ODOT's money here, that there are opportunities to leverage, when you find that the investment you want to make is within a municipality, on a non-state road, through those partnerships that you can leverage the local funding, that you can agree on these are the projects, or does it still end up being an ODOT project on a local road?
First of all, ODOT isn't going to go onto a local road and say, you will do this. Mm-hmm. We don't have that authority.
Right.
We can say what goes on our roads, but we're going to ask if they want to participate. So could you reform that question maybe?
Well, if I'm understanding correctly, you're going to look at, through this taxonomy, and you're going to say, where we want to put money is here, and it may be a state road or it may be on a non-state road.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So it's on a non-state road. So this road belongs to this county or this city, but you have the funding to solve that, to address that problem.
We're probably likely going to come to that local agency and say, we've noticed this problem, we'd like to invest this, what do you think about that? And that's where we'll have to engage the stakeholders, because, like I said, we can't really tell them what to do on their roads. But we're going to encourage them. We're going to show them the data. We're going to try to convince them that this might. But if ultimately they think something else might be better for them because of some practice that they do. For instance, let me give you an example of a rumble strip. Not all of our regions are really bought into rumble strips because rumble strips affect other things and how they do their maintenance on their roads, how they do winter plowing, how well they can move cars over onto the shoulder in work zones. Those are all concerns to our regions. That the same thing applies to locals. They may have a particular practice that they do that affects, that they may not want that measure on their roads, but they may want another measure. For instance, if for instance we say, put this durable striping with the, you've all ran over that durable striping that has little bumps in it, and it kind of makes a rumble sound. Perhaps they'd go with that rather than rumbles. Or perhaps they want delineators instead of rumbles or the durables.
So and you started off with this comment, when Oregon is looking around, are there other states that exemplify the kind of approach that you're taking? Or are there states that you've seen do a different, the states that you're learning from one way or the other?
The closest that I'll mention, and I don't remember what state this was, it might have been Missouri, but basically what they're doing is they're like saying that these are the top 10 counties for roadway departure, and we're going to invest money in these top 10 counties. But they're still making the approach that they're going to give the counties the money, they're going to give the counties the consulting, and they're going to act like they're consultants to the counties, but the counties are going to deliver the projects. So this is a little different. We're going to get there in Jurisdictionally Blind, I think, because the next one, when we go from this transition, we're going to allow the counties and the cities to also pick hotspots. And then how that process is going to go is we're going to kind of try to leave it up to the regions to decide in each region how that goes, and then maybe learn from who's got the best practice and maybe implement that statewide. So we're trying to be open.
So how were the projects selected before? Just on ODOT roads?
Yes.
Okay, and then the question, that was what led to that question. What do the numbers look like up there if you only show the ones affected by intoxication? Do you have that data?
I don't have that data up here.
Yeah.
But if you were to show, like the Deweys,
Yeah.
40–50% of
It'd
those,
still be evenly distributed? Like
Chris
that?
might have that number more at hand. It's pretty high percentage for the number that we believe that are out there.
Yeah, it's like 36% of all fatal, so I don't think I've looked at it.
Fatal and serious.
Fatal and probably the same, but then breaking it down into this would be, I'm not sure how it would look. Probably similar.
Will that affect the projects at all?
In one sense, yes. And in one sense, if we do an engineering measure that can keep the drunk on the road rather than driving off, they might go home to their family. Or they might not run into another family who's on the road head on.
I would guess that you see more efficiency per dollar spent with in urban areas than in rural areas because you can focus on those hot spots versus being spread out. How do you reconcile that efficiency with still, needing to accommodate safety in rural areas versus urban areas and that sort of thing?
That's a good question. I think the efficiency comes, what we see for efficiency is these systematic measures are very efficient, like a 50-to-1 cost-benefit ratio, very high cost-benefit. The traditional approach traditionally has been between 10 and 5-to-1. So even on the rural, for the systematic, we get very high cost benefits. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I think traditionally we spent more money in the urban area than in the rural area, But I think that that has been more because more people live in the urban area and really bring to our attention the problems of the urban area. And we're listening to the public.
Right, they're visible. And,
Right.
And by a big population, so they're
Right.
hearing back from them.
And what I really would like to see is the systematic start cutting into those run off the road departure, which is more rural, because that's a high percentage of the crashes that are fatal and serious injury.
And is Region 2 the Salem-centered
Yeah.
region? Okay,
Mhm.
so this is for that.
This is an
Portland
example
to
for that for
Eugene.
county roads. See, it goes right down through county roads. Right?
Yeah. Okay, and then my last question is, what's the, sort of off topic, but what's the general sentiment as far as roundabouts go with ODOT, as far as both traffic flow
ODOT?
and safety?
Mr. Safety here says 2 thumbs up, but it's not quite that easy of an answer, because a lot of times it's more perception of the public and perception of getting large trucks on state highways, which ODOT deals with most. On state highways, our state highways are the freight routes. They're where the trucks are. So if we can prove to the freight industry that they can get their trucks through them, and we can do a good job addressing their concerns, we can start seeing the same number of roundabouts going in, which practically wipe out all the fatal and serious injury crashes, by the way, at an intersection over a signalized. We can see roundabouts start going in like our partner to the north of us in Washington has been successful at doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Do you think we're getting there? Are you making headway?
I think we'll start seeing them more and more. I think it's a slow process. I think once the public buys into them, we'll have more success. Are we out of time?
I just want to ask one sort of
Oh,
closing
sure.
question. So what's the the traditional pot of money? Are you still going to have some split that goes towards the traditional high crash location, or is the whole program going to transition into this jurisdictionally blind approach?
Good question. Actually, the management team that's higher than I am at ODOT has basically decided that there's going to be this pot of money that is general, what I call HSIP. This is general. It's about $18 to $20 million if you want it round numbers. So you got about $18 to $20 million of traditional, which could be used for other things, but it's going to be mostly traditional. And then we've also set aside about $9 million for roadway departure, another $4 million for bike and ped, and $4 million for intersection. And those three pots, the 9, the 4, and the 4, are going to be mostly systematic.
And then the jurisdictionally blind is
That's all good.
all told.
That's going to be the big.
The big picture. Okay.
That's going to be the big picture. All that money is going to be spent jurisdictionally blind in the future, in 2017. That's our hope.
Okay.
That kind of gives you a general picture. It might change. But.
All right. So one last question then.
Thanks. You mentioned Missouri. Are there any other states you're looking to as leaders in already implementing this kind of program? Or is most people still in the early stages like Oregon?
Well, some states are further along. I attended a peer exchange in Idaho last year that I thought, well, I'll just frankly say, I thought it was going to be kind of a waste of time. And it was a big eye-opener for me. And Missouri was there, Illinois was there, and then all of our partners around us. Caltrans was there, Washington was there, Idaho, Montana, Utah, I think. I can't remember. But the two states that were kind of showing off what they were doing was Illinois and Missouri. So when I got back, I kind of started looking at some other states that they had mentioned. Now, there's probably other states doing things out there that I couldn't find on the web. But looking to see what the best practices are, it's kind of difficult. You really need to almost do a research project that says, okay, I want you to survey all the states and tell what the best practices are. And I think the feds are doing some best practices around that kind of thing. So I think there is a study out there underway, not yet done yet.
Okay. Well, thank you, Doug, for taking the time
Thank you.
to present.
Okay.